It's 773-763-WCPT, 773-763-WCPT. But I think right now what you want to do is listen to this story. Listen to this story because it was something that moved me greatly, and I think it will move you too. It will move you too. It's called the Black American Amputation Epidemic, and it's by Lizzie Presser, brilliant journalist from ProPublica who's been on this show before. She writes, it was a Friday evening in the hospital after a particularly grueling week when Dr. Felucio Facorede, the only cardiologist in Bolivar County, Mississippi, walked into room 336. Henry Dotstry lay on a cot, his gray curls puffed on a pillow. The doctor smelled the circumstances, a rancid whiff like dead mice. He asked the nurse to undress the wound on this man's left foot, then slipped on nitrile gloves to examine the damage. His calf had swelled to nearly the size of his thigh. The tops of his toes were dark. His sole was yellow, oozing. Dr. Facorede's gut clenched. His foot is rotten, he thought. Wow. He'd been asked to consult on the case, peeled off his gloves, and read over this chart. 67. The man had never smoked. His ultrasound results showed that the circulation in his legs was poor. Uncontrolled diabetes, it seemed, had constricted the blood flow to his foot, and without it the infection would not heal. A surgeon had typed up his recommendation. It began, he has limited options. The doctor scanned the room. He has quick, piercing eyes, Lizzie Presser writes, a shade tan, and at 38, the frame of an amateur bodybuilder. He was still. He was still. And off he went to look for some answers. And now he's become a doctor to more than 10,000 people in the Mississippi Delta. We welcome to the show Lizzie Presser of ProPublica, who wrote this brilliant piece, and Dr. Felucio Facorede, brilliant cardiologist and really a true servant. As we look at diabetes, that is really, it seems like it's overtaken the nation, doctor. And diabetes in African Americans and in the Native American community and in the Latino community. It's just off the charts. Every 17 seconds, according to the American Diabetes Association, someone is diagnosed with diabetes. I don't understand it. I've been in England, and they have a major problem. I mean, they have a lot of testing sites all throughout the UK because this is a real problem. Let me start with you before I go to Lizzie Presser. Welcome to the show, my new hero. How are you?
Good morning. Good morning. How are you? Thank you for the privilege of the invitation. How are you doing?
Oh, thank you for the privilege, and thank you for doing God's work, really, because you could be making a lot more money. You could be making a lot of money. In fact, you've gone past that to serve people who cannot afford to pay, people who are, you've become an activist, too, because you've had to fight for these patients. Please explain.
Well, of all forms of inequality, injustice in healthcare is the most shocking and inhumane, and those are the words of the late Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, Jr., and that statement was made at the Medical Convention for Human Rights in Chicago in 1966. And it's such a profound statement because if you look at the spectrum of our healthcare system and you look at the health inequalities and inequities that currently plague our system, you'll realize that it's spanned decades. And some of the solutions that have been proposed to date have been elusive. Mm-hmm. And of all the burdens of health, it's broken down by either condition or by state. By condition, you'll note that diabetes and obesity, if left unchecked, will be our next greatest health challenges. And the complications of those conditions will also bear out in terms of the clinical, economical, and human impact that it will serve. And in this case, the condition is called peripheral artery disease. It's a mouthful. It's called PAD. And what PAD does is PAD is the most prevalent, debilitating, deadly, and costly pandemic that most people have never heard of. It affects 200 million people worldwide. Most people affected have risk factors that are either of age greater than 60, they're diabetics, they've had some form of nicotine exposure, They've had high blood pressure, high cholesterol. They are mainly of racial and ethnic minority groups, such as African Americans, Hispanics, and Native Americans. And they've had some form of either kidney disease or heart disease and strokes. And if you were to look at all those conditions, the risk factors, diabetes is in play in mainly all of them. Obesity is in play in mainly all those conditions. And so we have a healthcare crisis that has mainly impacted these low socioeconomic and also areas where you have a high prevalence of minorities. For instance, Mississippi, 37% African American population, majority of whom live here in the Mississippi Delta, and majority of whom who just seek access to quality care. And so when we implement policies, and we have both systemic and systematic policies that do not favor these groups, they materialize in having higher rates of those complications, such as blindness, amputation rates, dialysis, heart attacks, strokes, and deaths. And so in my case, it's basically, unveiling some of the systematic issues that one can face as a physician who's trying to muddle through the channels in our healthcare system and navigate through to just become an advocate for patients who deserve the same quality care that the congressman should get, that the president should get, that my mom and my dad should get, irrespective of their socioeconomic status, their insurance status, their color, their gender, and their race. And that's where we stand.
Well, what has happened? I mean, because in this case, I mean, it seems like this case took you on a whole journey because you've been trying to save, you were trying to save his limb. And you had all these roadblocks. What were some of the roadblocks?
Right. So, some of the roadblocks, when it comes to this condition, I compare it to cancer. In cancer is very slow. It's progressive. It's not diagnosed on time. You will end up with its most severe form, which is very hard to treat. And so when someone who is a diabetic who has a faster rate of building plaque and cholesterol and thereby causing a narrowing of the blood circulation to your legs and your feet, and if it's not screened on time, will lead to symptoms and will lead to conditions such as ulcers and non-healing wounds. If that is not treated in a timely fashion, it could lead to the extreme form, which is called gangrene, which is what is described in that patient's case. And when the patient has gangrene, what you have to do is you have to take a multidisciplinary approach to treat the patient. And what that entails is having a doctor who has the skill set, the technical competence to go in there and unclog the blood vessel supply to that artery and restore good oxygen-rich blood flow to that leg so that it can heal. It also entails a good wound care specialist coming in and giving appropriate treatment therapies to enable the wound to heal properly. It also entails a good healthcare system that affords the patient to have access to good medicines that we can give the patient both within the hospital and outside the hospital. In this case, we have a patient who presented in extreme form, and I was consulted to come and treat the patient. But there were barriers within the hospital that prevented me from taking the patient down to what we call the lab or my operational suite where I can go in and unclog the blood vessel. So I had to be creative and look for options within my office where I do have similar settings where I could treat patients. And I started this program with that in mind when I came here. You have shortages of specialized care in underserved communities. You have shortages of high quality, high technological, techniques and opportunities for patients to receive treatment therapies early on in the disease process or late in the disease process that could prevent them from undergoing an amputation. And for the audience, they have to understand that that is critical in every case because once a patient loses their limb, 80% of them are dead within a 5-year period. You also have to understand the cost to that patient and to our healthcare system. It takes about close to $100,000 a year to take care of an amputee. And we're talking about a state in here in Mississippi that has the highest prevalence of amputation, but also the poorest state in America with the highest poverty rate, and the median income that's close to about $39,000 a year. So how would a man who makes $39,000 be productive not only to society but also afford an amputation? They can't, and so they are doomed. They're doomed from all aspects in terms of trying to live a long life and increase their life expectancy, and their families share this burden from an economical standpoint, which has a role in terms of our healthcare dollars and economical costs. When you look at the burden that's shared by Medicare and Medicaid, with 70% of that burden being spent by we taxpayers, being paid by taxpayers, and that cost is about almost $200 billion a year. So it's profound, and we need to call it out for what it is. And so in the article, well written by Lizzie Presser, who is brilliant at what she does.
Absolutely.
We outline basically some of the challenges and barriers that we have in our system.
And and when we come back, we're going to speak with Lizzie Presser, because she just devoted a chunk of her life to come down and investigate this injustice, which is what she does. She looks at inequities in healthcare, the disparities in healthcare, how different people are treated differently. The poor are treated very differently than people who have money. Black people, brown people, Native American people, indigenous peoples treated very differently. But I bet you we're seeing the same issue in Appalachia too. Black lung disease is still very real.
Yes, yes, we are.
When we
come
come
back,
back,
the burden of health.
No, because I know this gets you excited. I'm so excited to talk to someone who's excited about this.
The burden of health is actually, as you said, the amputation lottery of America. It all depends on who you are and where you live, and the regional variability in terms of care and access to procedures that could prevent bad outcomes, such as amputations or heart attacks. They vary, and so we need to look at not only Mississippi, the South, but also Appalachia, where you have a low socioeconomic status, but you also have a
30 seconds.
No, hold on, because it's on the south side of Chicago too. It's in Compton too. It's on a reservation too. It's in barrios. It's everywhere. It's in Appalachia. We'll talk about this. I'm going to talk with Lizzie Presser and see. He's been very modest. We're going to look at the roadblocks that stood in this man's way. We're talking about the Black American amputation epidemic, but guess what? When we have a cold, when America gets a cold, we have pneumonia. Eventually, if we don't treat this, everybody's going to have pneumonia. More of the Santita Jackson Show in just a few minutes. Hey, Sarah, I love Congressman Mfume. I've known him a long time. He ran as Reverend Jackson's delegate in 1984, which was an unpopular thing to do.
Have you ever wanted to learn a new
and
language
then
like
he
French,
that helped to lay
Russian,
the foundation
but
for
thought it would
him
be too difficult
running
and
for Congress a couple of years
then
later.
Go to Babbel.com and try it for free.
Yeah, he was one of our
Babbel
guys in
works
Baltimore.
because it's built around real life.
That's right.
It teaches you everyday practical conversations
Congressman
that you will
Mfume. I'm
actually
glad he's
use.
going back.
In
He's a
15
wonderful,
minutes a day,
wonderful man.
You'll be
wonderful
on your way
man.
to speaking a new language
Wonderful
in
man.
just a few weeks. Babbel uses a modern conversation-based technique that makes
You
language
guys,
engaging,
this is
fun,
Dr.
and memorable. It
Oh,
starts
my
by teaching
gosh.
you words and phrases. Then, sentences
Is
gradually
Dr.
get more
Fakorede
complex.
is he
Soon,
not a
you're
jewel?
practicing short conversations about real-life topics. Babbel is created by
blessing
language
he is.
experts who
What
use
a
the spaced
blessing.
repetition
What a
method
blessing.
to help you
What a
learn quickly
blessing.
and remember what you learned. With Babbel, you can speak a new language. Babbel.
Wow.
Language for life. Now try Babbel free. Just go to Babbel.com or download the Babbel app and start learning a new language today. That's Babbel.com. Babbel.com.
You're listening to WCPT 820. Here's the latest Chicago traffic update.
We are looking at major delays on I-55 at Will County right now. Traffic is at a standstill essentially from Route 129 to River Road, where all traffic is forced off the interstate The closure is between River Road and Blodgett in the construction zone. There was a crash involving a box truck near Blodgett. The traffic's forced off northbound at River Road, but there's a long backup. Farther north, the inbound Stevenson has mild delays. Pulaski at Kedzie and western to the Rhine. It's 30 minutes, 3:55 to Lakeshore Drive. Kennedy inbound. It's heavy in the express lanes. Montrose to Pulaski with a stall on the right shoulder. Eisenhower outbound at North Avenue. There's a stall blocking the left lane. And that's traffic. I'm Jim Talamonte.
This is Tom Hartman, and I want to thank the United Union of Roofers and Waterproofers Local 11 for sponsoring the Tom Hartman program on WCPT. They're celebrating their 100th anniversary, and I wish them another 100 years of building a strong middle class, protecting a living wage for workers, and making the world a better place through solidarity. Listen to me every day, weekdays 11 to 2 p.m. on WCPT 820, where facts matter.
Can you believe that, Michael? Michael, it's horrible.
You're never completely ready to adopt a teen.
For late nights writing English papers.
For your teen's music taste.
For dinners, where they talk more on their phone than with you.
For the
Lizzie
first time,
Presser wrote this, everybody. She did this.
Mom.
She didn't just write it. She
You're
investigated
never completely
this,
ready
and
to
thank
adopt
God
a teen,
we are seeing
and you can't
Dr.
imagine the
Felucio
reward.
To learn more
Facorede.
about adopting
We are
a
so,
teen, visit
so
adoptuskids.org.
grateful for him and his
Brought to you
work,
by the
and
US
for Lizzie
Department of Health
Presser's
and Human
work, because
Services,
she
Adopt
went down
US
to the
Kids,
Mississippi
and the
Delta
Ad
and spent
Council.
weeks
This
down
is
there
John Greenhut, and if
uncovering
your teeth are stained
this
from coffee,
story
tea,
and
or
amplifying
smoking,
it. And we're
Power
so
Swabs
grateful
is the
to
answer.
her
In
for the
5
work that
minutes,
she
you'll
does.
see 2 shades
You're going to be
whiter
hearing
teeth,
much
and
more
in
from
7
her
days,
on this
6
show.
shades. Even better, there's no messy strips or trays that you'll have to leave in your mouth for an hour. Just swab your teeth for 5 minutes, and you're done. To try Power Swabs, call 1-800-679-0969. Your bright white smile will have your friends talking about how great you look. Try it risk-free. 1-800-679-0969. That's 1-800-679-0969.
For 95 years, Saya
45
LTL Freight
Thank you.
has hit the road to deliver the goods that keep businesses and communities moving. Now, in
Thank
this
you, Sarah.
uncertain time, we
I
won't
love
stop
that guy,
going
too.
that extra mile. Because at the end of the day, we are all in this together for the long haul. Saya LTL Freight, driving stability, safety, support,
glad you're getting
and
something from this,
strength.
Philip.
Visit Saya.com.
Michael. Yeah,
That's
thank you, Michael,
SAIA.com.
for this.
The Tom Hartman
For the
radio
session?
program provides
Yes.
all of the intelligence, information, and insight you'll need to win the water cooler wars. Weekdays 11 to 2 right here on
10
WCPT
seconds.
820,
Mic going hot.
Chicago's Progressive Talk, where facts matter.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Santita Jackson Show. We have been talking about the Black American amputation epidemic with Dr. Felucio Facorede from Bolivar County, Mississippi. He has made it his business to take on 10,000 plus patients to prevent unnecessary, costly amputations that will hasten your death. That's something my grandmother, Dr. Facorede, worked in food services in the VA hospital in Newport News, Virginia. So she learned a lot about healthcare. And she said, do not let these people cut you when you become a diabetic, because you will soon be out of here when that happens. But I want to bring on Lizzie Presser, doctor, if you, with your permission, because she went and uncovered this story. And she does such brilliant work. She always brings stories to us that make my eyes pop out. And this one is beautifully written, everybody, beautifully written, and it's full of so much information. Lizzie Presser, welcome back to the show. I think the doctor is very, very modest. He's not telling us about the hoops that he had to jump through to save this man's life, to save a limb. Please help me.
Good morning, Santita. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Thank you.
Where to even begin?
I don't know.
What Felucio, what Dr. Facorede's been through. I mean, I guess I just want to start by saying some of the statistics that we haven't said on the show yet. We're talking about 130,000, diabetic amputations a year in this country. So it's a huge number. And when you look at the disparities, black patients are at least 3 times more likely to lose limbs than other patients, which means that they're many times more likely to lose limbs than white patients. Dr. Felucio Facorede just to give you a sense of the hoops he went through overall, he moved to the state of Mississippi that is perhaps the least hospitable to a black man in America. And what he thought he was going to do was work on hearts. He is, after all, a cardiologist. But he was so shocked by the state of his patients' legs. They were cold and hairless, and their pulses were weak. And what he was noticing was that there was an enormous number of patients who had what he just explained as peripheral artery disease, where clogged arteries in the legs are limiting the flow of blood, and you're at risk of amputations if you don't treat that. And what he was trying to do at first was just get doctors to screen for this condition. And that proved very difficult. And part of that is because there are so few primary care doctors in the Mississippi Delta that some of them see up to 70 patients a day. So to ask them to take on another screening is very difficult. But another part of it is that our law does not mandate that insurers cover this screening. And that's because a panel of experts that you've probably never heard of, called the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force, hasn't endorsed screening. Then on top of that, you have patients who don't know about this condition. And I would say that's across the country, right? Whoever talks about peripheral artery disease. But the same thing happening in your legs is happening in your heart, which is a heart attack, these clogged arteries, or it's happening in your neck, which is a stroke. And what's happened is this has become this very silent condition, though it's extraordinarily visible, right? We all see people with amputations, but we just aren't talking about what's getting us there. And so Dr. Fakaridi made it his mission to spread awareness about the condition across the Mississippi Delta and then nationally, and also to treat as many patients as he could. And as you say, Santita, he came up against enormous obstacles, and one of them is the screening issue that I'm explaining. But another, which I talk about in the case of this particular patient that I follow, is that there just aren't policies written by the government, by hospitals, by insurers that make sure that the healthcare system is responsible enough to give patients life-saving, limb-saving tests called angiograms before doctors decide to cut off a leg. And that is not acceptable. Well, and Felucio, Dr. Fakaridi, I'm sorry,
yes,
cannot fight that entire system himself.
Well, where is the money? Where is the money? Because it seems to me, from what I was reading this report, that, some people make a lot of money off of these people losing their limbs.
Can I answer that in terms of where the money is? If you were to have a condition that's costing your healthcare system close to about $300 billion a year, and I told you that close to about 90% of those amputations are preventable if they're screened on time and treated on time. That is a lot of money to take care of a lot of issues that we have, both in our healthcare and other systems, our educational systems, and also our, the wealth gap that currently exists, the true social determinants of health that exist that actually lead to a lot of the health disparities that you actually see today could be addressed with that money. So in terms of laws and policies that we need to adapt, the first question we need to ask is, one, what are in place in our healthcare systems, both on a hospital setting, hospital level, and also in the clinical level, where physicians themselves advocate for patients to understand their health conditions. Especially in the Delta, you have to understand the literacy level of your patient. So you have to kind of meet them where they are. You have to speak to them, teach them about diabetes, teach them about not walking barefooted, teach them about some of their symptoms. Go to the churches and talk to them about the importance that sugar is the new tobacco, right? Talk to them about what it could do to cause blindness and to cause them to end up on dialysis, to end up amputated. Talk about preventative measures, because 50% of the bad outcomes could be prevented just by advocating and taking care of prevention. So that's on one spectrum or one silo. The next silo is, as a hospital system, we should have a policy that has a care coordination plan where you can do angiograms, which are procedures to unclog that artery, before you mandate that a patient undergo an amputation. 50% of patients in America are not offered that angiogram. 90% of patients in the Delta are not offered that angiogram before an amputation.
Why not?
And that in itself, that in itself is the issue, and that is for every reader to read and figure out why. Some of this has to do with healthcare administrators that really don't realize that the cost to your hospital system is extreme, actually, by having such policies, not in place. The cost to the patient is extreme by not instituting such policies. And so the surgeons, some who are general surgeons, will benefit because they get reimbursed for undergoing the amputation. Some of them are hospital employed. They get RVUs. They get paid for that. And so that is the injustice. That is what is criminal in that. All right? It's the fact that we are not doing what's in the best interest of our patients on that front. And that is where we have to try and restrain the heartless and talk about policy. And we talk about policy action and things that we can do from our healthcare system where we can implement kind of a system where we reward doctors who try and prevent amputations or who screen early on. We incentivize them. Just like we incentivize doctors to screen for breast cancer, right? We incentivize them to do a mammogram. We incentivize them to do a prostate screening exam. We should do the same for peripheral arterial disease by incentivizing them to check the pulses and to check, for circulatory deficiencies early on so that we can institute medicines and therapies before they get to the stage of requiring an amputation.
We're talking.
That is what is at problem here.
Oh, no. I'm not trying to cut you off. I want people to know who you are because you're down in Bolivar County, Mississippi, and I want you to know, everybody, that we're talking with Dr. Faluscio Fakarede. And we're talking with Lizzie Presser from ProPublica, who has given us his story because it's important for us to see because this is not just happening in the American South, Doctor. This is also happening on the south side of Chicago and in the Bronx.
Right.
And in Detroit, and in Compton,
Detroit,
and in South Central LA, and in Appalachia.
Right.
I mean, it's, I'm
in Arkansas.
Everywhere. I mean, I see so many, when you go into poor areas, you see so many people who don't have limbs.
That's right.
Here's another interesting piece, right? So the U.S. Preventive Service Task Force that Lizzie just mentioned they were established by Congress, and the premise in 1984 was to improve the health of all Americans by making evidence-based recommendations about preventative services. And in their statement, they raised concerns that this disease disproportionately is higher among racial and ethnic minorities and low socioeconomic populations and could perpetuate disparities in treatment and outcomes. They acknowledge that in their statement. However, they claim that we need more data, more research to be done in these populations. Here's the problem with that statement. African Americans and people of color, both brown and Native Americans and women, are not included in all the myocardiovascular trials that have been done to date. As an African American, we are 12% of the population, but less than 5% have been less than 10% have been included in trials. The Hispanic population, less than 2%. In women, less than 50%. So that in itself is an inequity that our policymakers who are dictating our screening and preventative strategies want implemented before they recommend saving limbs and saving lives. They're complicit in terms of these outcomes, and that has to be changed.
Lizzie Presser, because, knowledgeable patients are empowered patients. And I don't think we even understand how much we have to self-advocate when we are with our own doctors. And when you have people who are not literate, but also people who have, quite frankly, having, as the descendants of people who've been enslaved, they understand how we have been experimented on. And there is, Dr. Fakarede, there is a really, really, we push back against doctors, as you found, black people trust black doctors because of that experience. But also, I'm thinking of the enormous pain that these patients are in. I mean, you have people who come to you with rotting limbs. I mean, I was struck by the opening paragraphs of Lizzie Presser's story, the Black American Amputation Epidemic. I have posted it on my Facebook page, everybody. I can't imagine the kind of pain that they're in, Doctor.
They suffer in isolation. They suffer in terms of lacking someone who can be a voice or a megaphone for them. Mm-hmm. They suffer because they have been victims of, and people talk about personal irresponsibility whenever this issue comes up. Mm. And we all have personal responsibilities. Well, let's call it what it is. There are health inequities and inequalities that currently exist. 80% are due to social determinants of health. And we're seeing that with even COVID right now, right? Mm-hmm. So COVID has exposed the epidemic of inequality. What is access to quality care? What's the definition of that? Because you can go see a surgeon tomorrow with a breast mass, and he or she can recommend that rather than have a mammogram next, you should just have a mastectomy without any type of study to determine if it's malignant or not. That is an analogy to what's going on in our field with peripheral arterial disease and unnecessary amputations. The exact analogy that I utilize. You have these patients who come in who the same process that caused their stroke and heart attacks was not screened for poor circulation in their limbs because the primary care physicians who are overwhelmed and overburdened, their governing body does not recommend that we screen for these patients. And these are 18 million Americans that are afflicted with this condition that leads to 200,000 amputations a year, majority of whom are diabetics. And the cost to our healthcare system exceeds that for diabetes and cancers combined. So there is a lack of awareness issue on all levels, on the individual, provider, community, and national level. And that is why, I took pride in making sure that Lizzie got everything she needed to basically paint the perfect picture. I mean, she did an amazing job. Mm-hmm. It was well written, and it basically the voice to crack the stagnation in this topic that has spanned decades. And we also have a medical community, a community that I'm part of, that has also been silent. We are complicit because when you go to all these national conferences, all they talk about are, Mississippi's at the bottom. It lights up in red. It's red. Burden of health, highest there. But what is the incentive to recruit physicians such as myself to come to this place and do good? We've decreased amputation rates by almost 80% since I got here 4 years ago, 4.5, 5 years ago. I was not recruited. There's no incentive program in place for me to show good quality outcomes and get rewarded. Just doing the right thing is all it takes, right? Mm-hmm. Giving the patients hope. Giving them the same quality care that I would want my mom or my dad to have if they lived here. And so we need to try and take this message on all levels to our medical schools and to other vocational programs that, there is hope in working together as a team and setting up policies and changing these policies. And we've done so with the formation of the Congressional PAD Caucus that will educate Congress and communities about PAD while supporting legislative activities to improve PAD research, education, and treatment. And my hat is off to Congressman Donald Payne Jr. of New Jersey and Congressman Gus Dell'Arcus, who have formed the first ever bipartisan PAD caucus in Congress to work on these issues. And our job is to make sure that no amputee would have an amputation without an angiogram and without any effective screening methods upstream, rather than facing the downstream consequences.
Well, you speak of incentives. I mean, and that really is it, because it seems that the system incentivizes amputations. It incentivizes, in its own way, death. And, that which you can do to save someone's life when you were bringing, angiograms, just blowing through the plaque in someone's veins, their arteries.
Right.
That sounded like it was... People looked at you from what Lizzie reported. They looked at you like you were crazy. Like, what are you talking about?
Because no one heard that, right? It's an intergenerational problem. They live in homes where mom, grandmom have all undergone amputations. So they see that as a norm. And so, and talk about engendering the trust of our people. It is something inherent. If you don't understand the history, right, you don't understand Tuskegee, you won't understand why that's a big issue. And so when they see someone who looks like them, who understands the strengths and weaknesses, who goes out and talks to them, and who is advocating for them on all levels, you not only have that interpersonal competence, but technical competence to treat their issues. But you are rewarded with, patients who come to you to just, see if you can give them hope, whatever the condition may be, and lead them to the right practice or the right provider to take care of that issue. And that can be done anywhere in the country. It just, medicine encompasses the power in mankind to do good, to heal, and to be humanistic, which is the bedrock of what we do and what we are as a society.
Lizzie Presser, what made you go to the Mississippi Delta and look into this issue?
A couple of things. I was interested in diabetes, which is one of the most prevalent chronic conditions in this country and also the costliest condition. Mm-hmm. And we talk about these great scientific strides that we've made in diabetes care. I mean, the work that Dr. Fakarady does is no exception, right? The work of angiography and revascularization. But I wanted to understand, did these strides in care, were those meeting the people who needed the care most? Mm-hmm. And actually, the easiest way to see that is diabetic amputations. It's often a preventable surgery. It is, by one measure, the most preventable surgery in the country. So if you see a rise in diabetic amputations, you're seeing a failure in care. And that's what we were seeing. We had a 50% rise in diabetic amputations between 2009 and 2015. That's a huge rise. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to understand why it was so bad, what was going wrong. And I had read a couple op-eds by Dr. Fakarady, and I could tell that he was quite passionate about it. And I could also see that Mississippi had some of the worst outcomes for diabetes. And so I flew down, and actually Dr. Fakarady blew me off a few times. He wouldn't take my phone calls. He wouldn't answer my emails. He's a busy man. so I just showed up. And I convinced him to let me stick around.
Oh, my goodness. What happened? He's a busy man, Lizzie.
He's a busy man. He has more important things to do than respond to a journalist.
You have to understand, Lizzie, we've had people who come in and excuse this word, they prostitute the Delta and they take advantage of these people. And I wanted to make sure that that was not the case. Mm-hmm. And it was a test. Lizzie, I said, what are you coming here for, Lizzie? What is your objective? Because my why is to make sure that not only I take care of these people, but I protect them. Because they are a very vulnerable population, and I just don't need anyone to come take the data and statistics and run. We're used to that in our communities of color. We are used to that. And so she came in and she was honest, and she stayed and she saw it all. And so, and that, you have to credit journalists like that, right? Yes. She understands the core, the layers of everything that goes on, not only in this part of our healthcare system here, but across other fields as well, because it's not just in the cardiovascular field, it's in other specialties as well that you see such disparities and inequalities.
Well, she does great work, and I have to tell you, I have to give you a compliment as you speak, Lizzie Presser. You preserve the dignity of these human beings who have trouble. They're not, my brother Jonathan puts it so well, these are not troubled people, these are people who have trouble. Mm-hmm. And you gave them you preserved their dignity, and you described their lives. I mean, you might be illiterate, but that's not the measure of your worth. You might not make a lot of money, but that's not the measure of your worth. These people deserve to be cared for, and they don't even know what their options are, and they're dying, and they have rotting limbs, for heaven's sake. How can someone allow someone to be in their community when your toes are falling off? I don't understand that.
No. I mean, one of the things that's so devastating about this condition is that diabetes will numb your limbs. It's called neuropathy.
Yes.
And so a lot of people who have these wounds don't even know it. But I think, Santita, to your point, one of the things that was most tragic for me to witness was something that Dr. Fakaridi mentioned, which is that I kept meeting patients who really considered amputations as a part of life as a diabetic.
Yes.
And they're not. They do not need to be. And there was this kind of complacency. And then I would meet patients who would meet Dr. Fakaridi and look at him like, wait, what? You can do a test to save my limb? You can do a revascularization? Yes. Why didn't anyone tell me when I lost my other limb? Right? So it's this. Also, I was watching people kind of grapple with the realization that they had been betrayed by a healthcare system that they had tried to trust, right? And to see that unfold over and over again is quite shocking. And you realize that we do, as Dr. Fakaridi was saying, there is this conversation about personal responsibility. But if you just look at the layers of inequity in terms of the disinvestment in these communities, in terms of the jobs in these communities, in terms of the quality specialist care in these communities, and then you layer on top policy decisions that are actually excluding poor people, working class people, from quality care. It's like this is not about personal responsibility. This is about a systemic failure of our healthcare system to provide equitable care across the spectrum. And we're seeing it now. We're seeing it now at a very, very quick pace. But what's happening at a quick pace now is revealing what is happening very slowly under the surface, particularly with diabetes and also with peripheral artery disease.
Well, you know what? It's happening all over the country. Can you stay with me for just a couple more minutes? I know the doctor has to go care for his patients, but I've got some people over here on Facebook. I know I mean, look, to get a doctor, for an hour is like, oh my gosh, that's a lot. But if you could just give a final word to the people over here on Facebook on the Santita Jackson and Friends page, I would appreciate it. Everybody, I want to thank you, Lizzie Presser, for taking the time, for your persistence, for your insistence. Dr. Lucio Fakaridi, I want to thank you for not looking past personal responsibility. Yes, we have that, but institutional accountability. When you go after an institution and make them accountable, that's a whole different deal. And I appreciate that. I respect that. And I appreciate and respect that in both of you. And you have partners in the Santita Jackson Show family. Because we're going to work on this. We're going to get this story out far and wide so that we can save some lives. You don't have to lose a limb, everybody. But you need the information so that you can press for your health. And this needs to be a policy issue in 2020. Too many people in America have diabetes, and too many people do not know what their options are. You don't have to die from diabetes. You can live with diabetes. You can be healthful with diabetes. And we're going to talk about that on the Santita Jackson Show. Join me on Santita Jackson and Friends. I love you, everybody. See you in just a few minutes and be with you tomorrow. God bless.
Getting to work is a little different right now. Your new commute may be to the kitchen, or the couch, or the basement. If your commute has changed, you could be saving money on car insurance. With pay-per-mile car insurance from Allstate, you get the same reliable coverage you'd expect, but only pay for the miles you drive. Drive less, save more with Allstate. Visit allstate.com or call an agent for a quote.
Price also includes a daily rate, subject to terms, conditions, and availability. Allstate Fire and Casualty Insurance Company and its affiliates.
Oh, I love you,
Having
Michael
repairs
O'Connor.
done in your apartment should never come with strings
I'm going to
attached.
just have
like
a
being
few
harassed
minutes
and
with Lizzie
constantly
Presser
pressured for
and the
sexual
doctor.
favors.
My landlord told me my rent would be free
Dr.
if I gave him
Felucio
something in exchange.
Fakaridi.
The Fair Housing Act
What a
protects
blessing
you from
he is.
harassment
What a
by
blessing
anyone
he is.
associated with your housing, including someone
Boy,
making
he
unwelcome
reminds
sexual
me so
advances.
much
If this happens to you,
of
file a
Dr.
complaint
Andrew
with HUD.
Thomas.
No strings attached. To learn more, visit
boy.
hud.gov/fairhousing.
So
if you
much
fear
of
for your
Dr.
safety,
Thomas.
call 911. A public service message from HUD in partnership with the National Fair Housing Alliance. Stephanie Miller.
You know, percentage of the population we've tested, 1%.
Yeah.
You know who chimed in on that yesterday just to make us cry would be Barack Obama. He said the key will be a robust system of testing and monitoring, something we have yet to put into place nationwide. Guess who's going to be back on the campaign trail now that Joe Biden's the nominee. Guess who's going to try blow us even crazier because he can correct all his lies.
Stephanie Miller, weekday mornings 8 to 11. Sponsored by the Porsche Exchange in Highland Park. Visit 4Porsche.com. The number 4Porsche.com.
Okay, everybody, stay right there
This
for a hot
is
second.
8
We're just going to get some
News.
final
I'm
words
Rita
from Lizzie
Foley.
Presser.
If they
and
come
from
up
Dr.
with a
Fakarede.
COVID-19 vaccine, would you take it? Only about half of the people we asked said they would. Many of those who said they would not say they were worried about the safety of such a vaccine. AP correspondent Julie Walker picks up the story from here.
There are about a dozen candidates in the race to find one quickly, which is what worries Melanie Dries, who was polled.
Causes me to fear that it won't be widely tested as to side effects.
But Brandon
Vidalia? Okay.
I'm back. I'm going to bring up Lizzie.
Okay, did the
Presser.
doctor leave?
No, he's still there, it looks like.
Okay, very
Is he-
good. Okay, let me just bring that because he's got to go
Okay.
be with his patients today. Lizzie Presser?
I'm here.
All right, Dr. Falusho Fakarede. Hey, I'm getting it.
Well, I'm here.
All right, all right.
You got it.
You know what? I mean, I got a text from one of our listeners, someone who I know personally. And it almost made me cry because he was talking about a friend of ours who passed away. And he said, if he had had this information and if so many people I know had this information, they'd probably still be here. Because people don't have this information. We don't even know the questions to ask, Doctor.
Right.
I mean, and so can you kind of give us a primer on what we should ask? And then I'm going to find out from you and from Lizzie what we should be pushing for, angling for in 2020, as healthcare is the top issue, along with jobs, right now in America. and it seems like every other day, every 17 seconds someone is diagnosed diabetic. First of all, I want to know what is going on with diabetes? Why is every other person a diabetic now? What's going on?
Well, we have, when you talk about social determinants of health, you have basically things that have to do with food deserts, and you look at where majority of these patients who are becoming diabetics are. You have to look at lifestyle. I've told you obesity and diabetes, which is poor glycemic control. We have 30 million diabetics and 80 million pre-diabetics. So there are people who are teetering on the fence of becoming diabetic. There are 80 million. So when I say sugars and new tobacco, it has to do with our lifestyle, what we're eating, what we're ingesting, but also there's a form of genetics too that plays a role in that. And that goes to, policies in our schools as to what our kids are eating, in our homes and what we're eating in terms of access to good quality foods, and getting rid of some of these options that are available in low socioeconomic neighborhoods. But in terms of peripheral arterial disease and your friend's question, you have to know who is at risk for peripheral arterial disease. That's the first thing. It's not just only diabetics, but if you have high blood pressure, if you've had a smoking history, on you dip, you chew, you vape, any type of nicotine product, if you've had heart disease, stroke, kidney disease, if you're on dialysis, if you have high cholesterol, you are at risk for poor circulation. So the first thing you have to do is when you go to your physician's office or your next office visit, take your socks off if you have any of the risk factors and tell them to inspect your circulation to your feet, and they can order tests if they see that you do need that next level of therapeutic assessment. The next thing that you should do is, as a diabetic, you should avoid walking barefooted. You should seek out help if you have one extremity that's cooler than another. If you have, hair growth that is not growing as it should be down in your feet, if you're a man, if your toenail growths are abnormal, if your sugars are consistently high and your sugars are not controlled, those are things that accelerate the buildup of plaque in your blood vessels and atherosclerosis, which is the term. And lastly, if you're told that you need an amputation, you should seek out a second opinion. Because there are strategies such as an angiogram and an intervention that could be done before that. And so padadvocate.com is a site that I always tell people you can reach out to us and we'll lead you to anywhere in the country, because there are a bunch of advocates all over the country that could treat that condition if you're only given an amputation for a strategy. The second thing we have to do is that we have to basically address the tenuous relationship between our hospitals and the community. The hospitals need to go out and form community navigators to go and reach out to these patients and educate them about how to live right and how to eat right and how to get screened early on. Our policymakers need to do a better job in terms of trying to advocate for policies that encourage and incentivize screening upstream rather than amputating downstream. So we should disincentivize amputations. And I encourage everyone to just look into the PAD caucus because we have 4 tenets. We're trying to raise awareness, which is what we're doing right now, and we welcome any person or persons or communities who want to help us in that arena. Just as we did with cancer, our celebrities should be involved, our politicians should be involved. And we need to address all the social determinants of health in our policies when it comes to our policy actions and restrain the heartless and regulate behavior. That is my intention, and hopefully it leads to impact. Applying the standard of quality care in underserved areas definitely impacts who lives, who dies, and who gets amputated. And so we need to continue activating and agitating the levers of power for things to get better. That's kind of where I stand.
That's a whole lot. I mean, because Lizzie Presser, patients don't know that they need to self-advocate, and we don't know the questions to ask, and particularly now in this political season, why it is so important to have equal access to equal high-quality health care. But once we get there, you need to have a system that incentivizes life and not death. We continue to look at people and personal responsibility, but we are loath to look at institutional accountability. And our institutions are woefully lacking, Lizzie Presser.
It's true. And I think what Dr. Fakhridy said is spot on. I mean, there is a caucus, PAD caucus in Congress that is trying to affect change, but we need the public's health to get there, the public's help to get there. So if you live in a district where your congressperson does not belong to the PAD caucus, you can ask your congressperson to belong. You can just ask your congressperson, what are you doing about the high rates of amputations in this state? What is your goal? And have you considered joining this caucus? That's one way in which, as a citizen, you are capable of affecting some change. But then I also think it is putting pressure on Congress, right, to enact policy changes, very specific ones that Dr. Fakhridy was speaking about, that would actually restructure the system to incentivize doctors differently. And I do have some hope that after the wave of COVID dies down, as a country, we're going to have to turn around and say, how do we fix this? And one of the ways we're going to start is by looking at diabetes, because it is very clearly a serious risk factor for complications that can take the lives of far too many people far too soon.
Well, I want to get some final thoughts from you, Lizzie Presser, and then from you, Dr. Fakhridy. Please, Lizzie Presser, your final thoughts.
I think what I wanted this story to do was to make people angry about a system that has allowed Black people in particular to suffer diabetic amputations at 3 times the rate of others. It's unacceptable. And we're seeing those numbers kind of across the spectrum of complications of diabetes. And as a country, that's something that I don't believe that we should be tolerating. And so I hope that, if anything, from this conversation, you all feel empowered to speak up about this and to look into how you can help and how you can galvanize support to help prevent unnecessary amputations across the country. And you're right, Santita, it's not just Mississippi. It's all across the country, and particularly in underserved communities and in poorer communities and in minority communities. There's no reason why that should be the case.
Well, you have all of these for-profit
hospitals.
Lizzie, all of these for-profit hospitals. I mean, what is that? I mean, that is
the for-profit hospital system I cannot explain to you, but I will say that it is not in their financial interest either. Sure, maybe it is in the financial interest of a single surgeon to cut off a limb, but these are extraordinarily costly surgeries in the long term, and they are costly for our healthcare system. Diabetes is a condition that we can prevent, and when it comes on, it's a condition that we can control. You can manage diabetes. You don't need to have uncontrolled diabetes. But our system is not set up to do that.
Would
We're
you
set up
say
to
that? Stop.
On the back end.
Stop. Say that again. Because I know some people are diabetics, and they act like it's a death sentence, or this is just the way it has to be. I'm asymptomatic as a hypoglycemic. I found that out 20 plus years ago. Had no idea. It was like the family joke that if you didn't feed Santita by a certain time, she's not really nice. And I'd always fought with my weight. Had no idea. With all of the great health care that I had access to, Cleveland Clinic, Mayo, all of that, no one ever tested me for hypoglycemia. No one. No one. No one.
Wow.
No one. And it was, it never happened. It never even came across. It was only, I was living in New York, and one of my girlfriends who lived in Europe for years, she said, have you noticed that when you go with your friends who are wealthy, how they eat? She said they have a slab of beef on the plate and 3 asparagus tips. They don't have starches. I remember as a little girl, my mother and Mrs. Lewis, who lived next door, they had Dawn and I on a diet forever, and they would always take starches out of our diets, and we would lose weight. That having been said, when I became Dr. Atkins' patient, I was actually his patient, it changed my life. But he was under fire from the medical establishment and Big Pharma because they said, he just wants you to have a lot of grease and eggs and bacon. No. If you could, he sent you to a particular butcher in Manhattan because his wife was French. He said, I want your food to be clean. What you're having in the American diet are a lot of chemicals that are hurting you. You're having a lot of food that your body interprets as sugar. Santita, that doesn't work for you. And you see study after study that shows it doesn't work for African-descended people, Hispanic people, Native American people, white people who think that they're white. They might have something else in their background. It doesn't work for a lot of people. But the fact that we're not given, doctor, I can't believe that with all of the great health care that I've had access to, and I've been very blessed, no one ever asked me those questions. It was only when I read his book that I said, oh my goodness, I'm hypoglycemic. This was like in 96. It changed my life. It completely changed.
It was a catalyst. Yeah. You were informed and then you became transformed. And that's what we're doing down here. You know, what I tell people and just in closing, when it comes to advocating for health equity, we need to understand how far we've come as a society. There are certain states in America, Mississippi being one, that are yet to catch up to other states in terms of equity of healthcare and other social standards, education, income equality, and what have you. We're still about 20 years in terms of the gap. So when it comes to decreasing that gap in life expectancy by focusing on healthcare, education, economic, and environmental vitality, you need to address the structural racism and historical mistrust and maldistribution of power, resources, right? And we don't need more data. You know, this whole we need more data is one of the things that pisses me off because we have enough data. We need intentional action. We already have a bankrupt healthcare system, and COVID is not making that any better. We already have a chronic disease burden that's worsening. Our socioeconomic system, in terms of who's rich and who's poor, is just widening. So there's a reckoning in terms of our healthcare delivery system, and we have to decide what we're going to do. And our depending on hospitals to come up with policies has to end. If I did not own my outpatient center, where we shifted the care for these patients to my center as an outpatient, they would have had worse outcomes. So we need to address all this in terms of policy action. I believe in that. Morality cannot be legislated, but behavior can be regulated. And also address the conscious and subconscious racism and systemic racism, right? Policy action has to happen. And injustice, anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So changes require strategy, action, organizing, and it's policy. We need people like you. We need all your friends and family members And we need all that to keep hope alive in these communities. You know, as your dad once said, if we don't, you got to be a hope dealer. That's what I tell you. You got to go there and give them hope, because that is the worst thing. They're suffering in isolation without someone coming and giving them hope.
That's true.
And that's what we need in more of these communities.
I mean, because you also, just very quickly before you go, you got two maps, and you saw the slave states, and you saw the current amputation rates. And what did you see?
And there were. So if you look at the map of slavery in America, and you superimpose the amputation rates in America, and then you superimpose the areas in America that have the lowest angiogram and interventional rates, right? They're all the same. All the same.
I don't think you need to say anything else.
So, and if you look at the burden of health in America, quite honestly, that is the similar map as well. I mean, need I say more?
You know what? What you can tell us is we need to call our congresspersons today in both houses and ask them, particularly in the House of Representatives, what should we ask them, Dr. Lizzie? What do we need to have our congressmen do and congresswomen? What do they need to do?
You should tell them to support the congressional and join the congressional PAD caucus.
PAD?
Yes, ma'am. PAD caucus. And the
peripheral artery disease. PAD.
And what that would do is that would educate basically Congress and communities about PAD, right? With legislative activities that we want to implement. Last year we were able to secure language for the first time ever on the PAD awareness in the appropriations process. So we intend to work with PAD stakeholders later this year on a potential introduction of legislation to secure some kind of funding for not only PAD awareness, but for providing coverage for PAD screening for all these doctors who are in the forefront as primary care providers, and to discourage amputations without appropriate arterial or angiographic testing. That's our goal as a caucus, and it was formed in 2019 thanks to the efforts, which is a bipartisan effort, by the way, of Congressman Donald Payne Jr. of New Jersey, who is a PAD survivor and a diabetic.
Yes.
And also Congressman Billirakis as well. So our hats off to both of them for taking this on, and hopefully we can raise more awareness on this topic.
We're gonna work with you on this. I promise you, because I'm seeing too many people who are walking around here without limbs. I'm seeing too many people. When I look at their bandages, you see yellow. You see things. You see poison oozing through, and people shouldn't have to live like this. No one deserves this. No one deserves this, everybody. You have a right to the tree of life. That's what we say in church all the time. And I want to thank you. Oh, amen, sir. Doctor?
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And I want to
look forward to coming back at some point.
Oh, no. You let me know when you can come back, because I want you to come back ASAP, because people have a lot of questions. I couldn't even get to the people who called in, the questions that people have.
We should have a session where I address the questions regarding this.
Let me know when. Send me a text. Let me know when.
Okay.
Lizzie Presser, whenever you want to come here, whenever. You know this. You have a home on the Santita Jackson Show. I told you that yesterday, and I meant it. I thank you for your work.
It's such a pleasure.
No, I thank you for your work. And Dr. wait a minute, Falusho Fakarede. There you go.
Perfect.
Come on. What? My name is Santita, and so many people call me Santita.
No, I think you got it. It's perfect. Oh, you got it. It's perfect. And just again, thank Lizzie Presser again. She's done a great job, and
she does.
The whole world needs.
And he gave you such a hard time, Lizzie. These men, what
I
do you
know.
do with them? He said she's not serious. Oh my gosh. Busting her chops. And look at my mother said the gift never comes wrapped the way you think it's going to, the way it is. Never. Blessings to you both. Thank you so much for your work. God bless you, Lizzie Presser, and keep on pressing on. Next story, what are you working on next?
No, can't say quite yet.
Okay, well, you
but
know
I'll
what?
Let you know when it's right.
Okay, and then you come on the show and debut it. But we're going to come back, and I'm going to arrange with the doctor so that he can come back and talk about PAD, and talk about diabetes. So many people have it. So many people have it. You're not supposed to die from it, everybody. You can live with it and you can control it. Really, come on. We've got to do right, not just better. I love you both. God bless you, everybody. Thank you so much for being with us, and God bless you. And everybody, like and share this. Call your congressman today and have them join the PAD caucus, PAD caucus. So many of us have diabetes. So many of us can survive and thrive with diabetes. And this is a great beginning. Okay, let's do that, everybody. I love you, everybody. I'll see you tomorrow on the Santita Jackson Show. God bless you. Like and share. Thank you, Lori. I hope it was helpful to you, Lori. I really do. Medi, you have diabetes too. You know what? We're going to get the doctor back on so that you can ask him questions. Okay? I love you, everybody. I will see you tomorrow. Lady B, we're out of here. God bless you. See you tomorrow. Love you, Lorraine, everybody, all my morning stars. God bless you. Paul from Brasilia. That's right, Paul Hallstein. God bless you. Bye-bye.